All right, hello everyone. These are the notes for Target 5B. We're going to be talking about adaptations for this one. So this PowerPoint is going to be a little bit different. I'll walk you through like what adaptations are. So it's not going to be as much notes. It's more going to be me showing you an example of a project to do. So for this target, you are going to have to be able to construct an explanation based on evidence for how natural selection leads to adaptation of population. So like I said, you're going to be doing a project for this, so I will have an example on here. But we're going to look at the specifications for that project here in just a second, but first we have to talk about what an adaptation is. So an adaptation is a trait of an organism that helps its chance of survival, so it increases its fitness to the environment. So the way that I like to put it, just in simple terms, it's anything that's going to help an animal to survive, or anything that's going to help a plant to survive, anything that will help an organism to survive. So species that were able to adapt to their environment were more likely to survive and reproduce, which means that they were able to make babies. And then this adaptation was passed on. So if I'm a bird and I have the adaptation of being able to fly, well, this helps me to be able to escape predators better. This helps me to be able to hunt for food better. It gives me more access to food in high places. So this is a really beneficial adaptation. So if I'm able to fly, but my friend over there isn't, I'm more likely to survive and pass on the trait of being able to fly than my friend is. So I'm going to have more children that can also fly. And eventually the population of birds that are going to be able to fly, or the population of birds that have this adaptation, is going to increase. So there are three types of ways that we categorize adaptations: structural, physiological, and behavioral. Structural adaptations are body parts that help an organism to survive. So all organisms have structural adaptations. So an example is that some plants live in warm places. They have the ability to store water in them and use later when needed. So like a cactus is able to store water inside of it. So if there's like a drought in the desert, it's able to use that stored water to survive, because we know that plants need water to survive. Another adaptation, a structural adaptation, is wings. The ability to be able to fly, wings, it's a structural adaptation. Then we have physiological adaptations. Physiological adaptations are adaptations that involve chemical processes within the organism. This is by far the most complicated one. So we're going to talk about examples, because those make it easier for me to understand, at least when I don't know what the word necessarily means. So the most common physiological adaptations are to maintain homeostasis, or to maintain balance in an organism. So an example of that, some animals are able to control their temperature, and others have the ability to release poison when around enemies. So like reptiles, different animals have the ability to control their temperature. So like when we get hot, we sweat so that we will cool our body down. When we are cold, we shiver, we get goosebumps so that our body temperature will increase. So those are physiological adaptations. Those are things that allow us to survive and stay at homeostasis, because if our body temperature gets too high, we will die. If our body temperature gets too low, we will die. Next type is behavioral adaptation. So this is the last one. So behavioral adaptations are behaviors that give an organism a greater chance of survival. So some of these are referred to as instincts. And they're not taught from the parent to the offspring. They're just like instinctual. You just automatically know. So some of these examples are birds being able to fly south for the winter so that they can find more food. So like up here in the wintertime, you guys all know the trees get very bare. There's lots of snow on the ground. There's not very much plant life at all. So in order to be able to survive, birds will fly south to warmer weather, so that way there's more options for them for food. And then when the weather starts to get warmer up here, they'll fly back. So that would be an example of a behavioral adaptation. So adaptations in general just provide a way to find food. Sometimes they provide protection from environmental factors. They can provide protection from predators, or they're a way to maintain homeostasis. So it doesn't mean they have to be all of these things, but they are one of these things. So like, for example, sweating is a way that we maintain homeostasis. It's not going to protect us from predators, but it's a way that we maintain balance in our body so that we can survive. So these are just more examples of adaptations. So camouflage is an example of an adaptation, because it allows organisms to blend into their surroundings so they do not get eaten by predators, or so they can more easily capture their prey. So like these little polar bears are blend in with the snow because they have white fur. You can kind of see this frog up here on this tree limb is very camouflaged. This bug looks a lot, or this leaf looks a lot like these, excuse me, these bugs look a lot like leaves, so they're able to better camouflage, so they won't get eaten. Another one is defense. So different animals have certain defense mechanisms that allow them to escape predators. So these again are just examples of adaptations. Skunks being able to spray that nasty smell when they're feeling attacked. A lot of animals have spikes, like these porcupines and this lizard. A lot of animals will release poison, stuff like that. And then obtaining or storing food. So these are another more examples of adaptations, or excuse me, obtaining and storing food and water. So like hummingbirds have this really long beak so that they can get the food that's inside of this really long flower. These two plants are able to store food, they're able to store water for really long periods of time, especially this cactus because it lives out in a desert where it doesn't rain very much. So it has to be able to store its own water, otherwise it would die because it wouldn't have enough water. So these are examples of behavioral adaptations: hibernation, dormancy, which is when like plants look like they're dead in the wintertime. It's just that they've conserved all their energy, so they're no longer making leaves, they're no longer green. They look dead, but then in the springtime, in the summer, they will bloom again, and like they'll pop back up with new blossoms and stuff, just like a tree. It looks very bare in the wintertime. It's not dead, it's just in dormancy. Migration, we talked about that with the birds. It's when animals will fly to a different place, usually to find food. Hibernation is when animals go into like a sleep for a while, so that they conserve more of their energy. Most of these things happen in the wintertime. So we need to talk about this project. So for this assignment, you will be researching an organism of your choice. So this organism is the basis for ongoing research. So you're going to have to know about this organism. The main thing that you're looking for when you look at this organism is the adaptations that allow it to survive. So here are some examples of different organisms. We have a cheetah, we have a camel, we have a beaver, an aye-aye, we have a lionfish. So those are all good examples of things you could use: alligator, bullfrog, bear, eagle, octopus. You can really use any animal, any plant that you would like. So for this organism, you're going to have to make a poster or a PowerPoint. If you choose to do a PowerPoint, there is a template on Canvas that you can use, so you can just fill in the information. I sometimes think that's easier, so that way you're not trying to do it on your own. But you have to include each of the following things. So you have to include where in the world it lives. You have to include what kind of habitat it lives in, who it lives with, the food source, so what does it eat, its common name, and then 8 adaptations it has and how each one provides chances of survival. So that was a big thing that I saw that kids were missing points on, is you'd tell me the adaptation, so you'd say like, oh, a bird is able to fly, but you don't tell me why that helps the bird to survive. So a good example would be an adaptation for a bird is that it's able to survive. This allows them to be able to escape from predators better. This allows them to be able to catch more food. All of those things are ways that it helps the animals survive. And then lastly, you have to include a picture of the organism. So here's an example of a poster. You can't really read it, but it's about a great white shark. It tells you all the information about it, and then down here it lists 8 examples of the adaptations and how they help that shark to survive. Another big thing that I saw with this project that students tended to miss points on was their work citations. So you need to make sure that you are citing the sources that you use. So you're writing down the website, and then you're telling me like what the author and the title of that website is. You can just have a works cited page at the end of your PowerPoint if you choose to do a PowerPoint, or like on the back of your poster if you choose to do a poster. And then you need to make sure that you're citing within your PowerPoint or poster as well. So if you get information, especially if it's a direct quote, you need to put it in quotations, and then behind that, in parentheses, you need to tell me the website that you use. So if you got something from National Geographic and you really like it and you want to quote it, that's totally fine, but you need to tell me where you got that information, because otherwise it's plagiarizing, because it looks like it was just you made it up in your own brain when it was actually somebody else's ideas. So this is just a very quick run through of different types of evidence. You should have learned this in your English 1 class, or if you're looking at this right now and you haven't learned this in English 1, here's a really quick run through. We have different types of evidence. So we have this type of evidence. The author explains quote, a loss of habitat can happen naturally, quote, and then they have National Geographic. So like I said, this is what I'm looking for. This is what yours should look like. So if you're someone who's going to forget this, I highly recommend taking a picture or writing it down so that you remember to do that on your own poster in PowerPoint. But that type of quote is called a dialogue quote. We have, after an asteroid hit Earth, the dinosaurs are unable to adapt to the environment, therefore they wound up becoming extinct. So again, they put in quotes National Geographic. They have paraphrased this information, so they didn't just know this off the top of their head, so that's why they are putting National Geographic behind it. This is called, like I said, a paraphrase. So they're not directly quoting something, but they didn't just make up this information. So they're taking something from a website and they're putting it into their own words. We're calling that paraphrasing. So then we're going to look at this highlighted section to see if we can figure out what it's called. So after an asteroid hit Earth, the dinosaurs are unable to adapt to the environment, therefore they wound up becoming extinct. So where they have National Geographic in parentheses, I want to know what is that called. And that is called a parenthetical citation. So they have cited it, so that is their parenthetical citation. So again, if you are going to paraphrase something, you need to add a parenthetical citation as well. We have this other thing, so the author explains, quote, a loss of habitat can happen naturally, quote, so they have National Geographic again highlighted in there too, but this one is called a direct quote. Sorry, I don't know why it skipped over that, but anyway, that was called a direct quote. So you have to you have to cite your sources for both types of evidence. So the next few slides have an example of a PowerPoint that was done. It would be an AT, so if you're someone who's confused, you're not sure where to start, I would highly recommend looking at this example because it will give you an idea of what to do. So, target 5B, this person did kangaroos. So they answer these questions. So like I said, there's a template on Canvas. It will have the blank question for you. So it'll say, where in the world does it live? And you will just write underneath that the answer. So where in the world does a kangaroo live? The kangaroo is found in Australia, which has mostly arid and desert-like landscape. What kind of habitat does it live in? Australia is an arid landscape that has a lot of desert. So they're answering both of those questions. Kangaroos, who do they live with? So this is a big thing that trip people up. It's not asking like, oh, kangaroos live in the jungle with the other elephants and lions and da-da-da-da-da. It's asking about, do they live in groups or do they live by themselves? So kangaroos live in mobs or groups. These mobs will protect one another and help groom each other. So again, not asking who is it living with in terms of like, oh, does it live with other elephants? It's asking, does it live with other kangaroos or does it live by itself? And that's for every organism that you look at. Then we have the food source. What do they eat? Kangaroos eat mainly grass and leaves. They are herbivores which only eat plants. The common name for kangaroos is kangaroos. The scientific name is Macropidae. So you need common name, scientific name. The common name is just the name that we call the animal, kangaroo. The scientific name is the name that scientists use to classify the animal. So these are different adaptations. I am not going to go through all of these adaptations with you, but we'll look at this number 2 because it has a direct quote, so this is a good example of what you'd need to do. So it says, quote, kangaroos are marsupials, so the females carry the joeys in a pouch on the front of their abdomen or belly. Newborns weigh less than 1/10 of an ounce at birth, which is really, really small, and have to crawl up into their mother's pouch to nurse and grow. So they have in parentheses Exploring Nature 2022 because that's where the website they got it from. So that is a really good example too of how a marsupial pouch would help the kangaroo to survive. It says this pouch helps young joeys to grow and develop while being protected for much of their first year of life. So that's a good example of an adaptation. If we look at another one, it says pant when not exercising. Kangaroos pant when they are not moving to allow them to cool off if just laying around in the sun. This is important as they need to stay cool when still saving energy. So another example of an adaptation and also how that helps that animal survive. So that's the big thing. I want the adaptation, but I want to know how it helps them to survive. So if you're still a little bit lost, you can look through the rest of these, pause the video, read through them. Obviously, you can't do kangaroo now as your animal because I have an example here for you, but you can do any other animal. If you really, really want to, you can do a plant, but I think animals tend to be a little bit easier. So here's the last one. They have 8 adaptations. You're going to have 8 adaptations as well. and then they're works cited, so they just have the websites that they used. So again, this template is on Canvas. The PowerPoint, this example PowerPoint is also on Canvas, so if you want to take a look at it again on Canvas, you can do that too. But other than that, to finish this target, you need to do this research project, and that is about it. So there's no practice assignment for this one. There's no test. It's just this research PowerPoint.